Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In this video, we look at a deeper analysis into what is the temp database. So what is the temp database? SQL temp database is a system database that is automatically created when you first install the SQL server, and each time you restart the services, it's recreated from the scratch. And that's an important distinction to understand. So what is the primary purpose of the database and why does it require special attention? Well, it's used by SQL Server and all the users and developers. It's a workhorse when you have a busy system, and as such, the temp database, both the data files and the log files, can become enormously large if proper pre-sizing is not taken in consideration. So that's why there's a tremendous amount of neglect on the temp database, thinking it's a temp database. But again, in this video, we're going to demonstrate that this is a very important temp database to pay attention to. Many things are created, as I said here. Each time a developer or a user creates global or temporary tables or local temporary tables, they're created in the temp database. Other temporary items such as store procedures and variables and functions and so on, all are created and utilizes the temp database. So as I said, it's a busy workhorse that requires special attention. You can also use it for sorting, indexing. When you create an index, one of the commands, you can direct the sort into temp database. Therefore, when the index is created, it offloads the sorting of the database to the temp database rather than having it sorted in the database file. That's improves performance. So as you can see, indexing is a highly active performance, hits performance. So it's easy to offload that system. Other things that are happening in the temp database, obviously, a Mars, snapshot isolation, read committed isolations, and many other things that are happening. The thing that I'm trying to get at is that the temp database is a very busy database, and it can grow enormously large if precaution is not taken. So this is the idea that we must address it before any problems arise, and trying to be proactive. So that's the temp database. And some of the do's and don'ts about the database is as follows, and I'll be demonstrating it in a second. So what we can't do with the temp database like the regular databases, you can't drop it, you can't back it up, you can't change the recovery model, which is simple. We can't create multiple file groups. It's only created on a primary. You can't detach it like a normal database. And as I said, you can't back up and restore it. And we'll be going over that in a second, what the do's you can't. Some of the things obviously you must do and should do if possible is as follows. We've talked about the importance of placing both the data files and the log files of a regular user-defined database in separate drives if possible, and we should certainly take that consideration to heart when it comes to the temp database. So if possible, place both the data and the log files on separate disks. Place the files on the fastest I/O subsystem if possible. Pre-size the autogrowth, just like we've been discussing with the autogrowth capabilities of the user-defined databases. So we should pre-size the autogrowth so as to not allow it to kick in. And this pertains both to the data files and the log files. So this is an important feature we've talked about in detail in the previous videos. Create multiple data files for temp according to the formula, one data file per physical disk. And what I mean by that is that you can have multiple data files, not log files, but data files. And if you have a very busy system, then the ratio that the standard industry states is that you should have create one data files per physical or virtual CPU. And if you do create those extra data files, keep them of equal size. This is an important aspect to have. So take a note of that. So these are some of the aspects and characteristics of a database, temp database, that must be taken in consideration when you're pre-sizing and monitoring temp database. So now let's look at some of the ways we can go to the SQL and look at some of the properties. So the first thing is, obviously, let me go over here to the Object Explorer. The temp database, as I said, is created from scratch every time you restart the services and every time you install a new SQL instance. So if you go to databases, go to system databases, you'll see the database here. And very much like the other databases. This is a user-defined database. It looks very, very similar, which it is. However, a couple of things to note. If I right-click the admin, which is a user-defined, and I go to task, you'll notice that it has the ability to detach, the ability to backup. Now, if I do the same thing, if I go right-click here and go task, you'll see that I do not have the capability of detaching it, nor do I have the ability to back it up. So those are some of the differences, obviously. If I right-click here and go to Properties and go to Files, you can see initially the size is 8 megabytes for the data file, and usually 1 or 5. Since it's grown a little, usually it's 1 for the log file, and then obviously the default auto growth. And we must change this, pre-size this. So again, just like we talked about in auto growth in regular databases, same consideration must be given to the temp database, whereas we should pre-size this so auto growth does not kick in. And we can do that also. Another thing is, if I go to Options, you'll see that the recovery model is simple, and I cannot change that. If I change it to full and I go OK, I get an error message saying option recovery cannot be set to temp database. So we cannot change the recovery model either. So now, if you wanted to find the path or look at the temp database characteristics, obviously you can use the sprock sp_db followed by the database name. And if I highlight this and execute, you'll see that what we're interested in is the file name, and this is where it resides right now. And obviously this is by default, and as I had mentioned, that when installing SQL Server, and if feasible, you want to install both the temp data files and the temp log files to its own separate drive. In this case, it's just defaulted to C. But let's say if we wanted to change it to a different drive to improve performance, how do you do that? Well, you can use the alter statement command here as follows. And you can see now I've created actually a folder in drive C. Now, obviously for demonstration purposes, I'm using drive C and creating a temp table folder called temp database new location. But the drive C in your production environment will be a different drive than drive C. Maybe drive E, F, G, but certainly different than drive D. But for our purposes, it's fine. So imagine if I want to change the location of both the database file and the log file. This is the command. It's basically using the master database, alter database, temp database, modify file, followed by the entire path name that you wish to send it to. This is the original location of both the data and the log file, and this is where I'm going to move it to. So it'll be a copied version and to this new location. And as I said, this drive C should be a different one. So if I actually highlight this and execute it, you'll notice one thing is that this is the message that you get, which says the temp database file and the temp logins have been modified in the system. But take a note that the new path will be used the next time the database is started. So you need to restart the services. And the way you can simply do that is from the services, or you can just go right-click, restart, and go yes. So, and just say yes to both the SQL Server and to the SQL Server agent. Now these two services are going to restart, and then once we do the SP help database for the temp, you'll see the new locations from the modified location. So now that it's restarting, you can see it's still red here. And now if I do an SP_help temp database, you'll notice that this was the original path, and I wanted to move it to a different drive. In this case, I'm using this drive here. So now if I execute this, you'll notice that indeed it has been moved to this location. So I just moved the temporary files to a different location, keeping note for our demonstration purposes, we're only using the same drive, but in production, this drive will be different. So now I'm just going to push it back to the original, and then I'm going to restart it. So now it's back to the original, and then we'll look at that also. So again, you need to restart the services each time you move a temporary database file or a log file. Be very careful and test in your test environment before you doing that. If you make a mistake, it could have problems with restarting the SQL Server. So make sure you test this very carefully. So now if I highlight this, execute, you'll notice that again it is being restored to the previous defaulted file. As I mentioned, through this you cannot change the recovery model, so you cannot say you cannot use the Alta database set recovery to full because it's simple. So even if I try to change it, it'll say you cannot do it for a temp database. Now the other thing that I wanted to illustrate before I wrap this up, obviously, is that we've been talking in the previous videos about sizing and what should be the appropriate sizes for the databases and the temp database. Same consideration must be given to the temp database as it is in the user-defined database, and that is we should pre-size both the data files, log files, and the auto-growth properties. And obviously, if we go back to the database, system database, right-click, go to properties, and look at the files, you'll see indeed that we have not allocated sufficient space for that. And this is again determined by your activity of your system. So now I'm going to change the original data file, the log file, and I'm going to change the auto-growth properties here with this script. And this script will be provided. So you'll notice here I'm pre-sizing the data files, which is this right here. I'd modify the data file. And then I'm also going to modify the file growth, which is the auto growth for the data file and both for the log file. So now if I highlight this and execute, it's done. And now if I right click the temp database, go to properties, go to files, you'll notice that initially the data file was 8. I've changed it to 100, pre-sized it. The log file was 5, and I've changed it to 100. And I've changed the auto growth features. Now, obviously, I'm just randomly choosing numbers here to set, but the purpose of this illustration is that we must pre-size both the data files, log and change the configuration of the auto growth files so it does not kick in. And again, that's based on your activity, and that's beyond this course. So I'm going to leave it there, and that is an important demonstration of how to look at the temp database, its location, if you wanted to move it, some of the things you can and cannot do to the temp database, and now how you must actively and proactively monitor SQL temp database, because it's a very, very important database to manage. It can cause a tremendous amount of performance issues if this is not managed properly. And like I always say, one of the most important aspects of database administrator is to be proactive in managing everything. And this is one of the key things that you should look for when you work for a company or you're designing your database. Take in consideration the sizing and properties of temp database. So I think I'll leave it there, and we'll continue with the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.